Hello everyone and welcome to the Talent Game podcast. I'm your host, Joe Burridge, and with me today is Kate Booth. Welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Hey Joe, really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. In fact, we just spent about half an hour just chatting away and I was like, right, we better actually hit record now and record this for everyone to listen to. So yeah, really excited to get into it. So for those who have no idea who you are, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
So I am COO at Cooperative Innovations, and we make games and games tech, really with a focus on multiplayer and multi-platform development.
Fantastic.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, that was very succinct. I appreciate that. And so, yeah, this initial question that I've been asking everyone so far is, what are you playing right now?
So, bear with me 1 second, because I did make a list. I've been playing loads of stuff at the moment. I find it like it's my number one choice of how I relax. And I'm moving house at the moment, so life is a bit stressful. So sticking on my headphones and playing like a big open world game is just my happy place at the moment. I played through... I'd finished all of the Zelda. I always play everything in the Zelda franchise from, so when I'd finished Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, Ratchet and Clank that I played through twice. I know these games are not super current, but it had been a while since I'd had a lot of time to sit down and play games. And then I was struggling to find a similar big open world game that I wanted to play that appealed. So I've been going through a bit of a renaissance, and I've actually gone back and replayed GTA San Andreas, GTA 5, Black Flag, which was amazing. Tried to play Valhalla, but the control system had changed so much. I just really struggled with it, and it wasn't for me. Beautiful, looks absolutely gorgeous. And I've most recently just finished Uncharted. So I'm usually about 2 or 3 years behind the curve of current games. But also, I love Steam. Indie games are probably like my favorite kinds of games to play. I'll play it on mobile as well. And I recently just played Thank Goodness You're Here by a little studio called Cold Supper. It's absolutely beautiful. I can't recommend it enough. It's a gorgeous, weird, beautiful homage to the North, basically. And it's gorgeous. Please go and check it out. I'd recommend anybody who hasn't picked it up yet, just go and enjoy it. Let it wash over you.
Northern England, I assume. You mean
yes,
by the north?
The north of England. And I have to say, when people talk about representation in games, I'm not from Yorkshire, but it was beautiful. It's a real homage to like the 70s, 80s, like northern culture when all. My partner is from the south. Always uses the phrase "shut that door" whenever he sees something that weird and northern that I'm looking at that he doesn't recognise. But yeah, it's very that type of humour. It's published by Panic, so did Untitled Goose. So that's a good indicator of the weird type of game it is.
Oh, fantastic! Well, I was just thinking my mum is from St Helens, so
nice.
Yeah. So brought up with a burly northerner in the house as well. So
I am definitely a burly northerner.
That's great. And what a fantastic list of games. Tears of the Kingdom is still on my backlog. I'm a massive Zelda fan. How I've not actually got around to playing it yet, I have no idea. But I love the big open world games. But it's funny you mentioned indie games. Just yesterday, I completed a pixel art Metroidvania. I love that, the action platformer style Metroidvania. It's based off like this 80s.
The Well one? I forgot what it's called.
Animal Well? No, it's not.
Yes,
but that's,
Animal Well.
No,
I've also played that recently, and it was amazing.
Yeah, so that is definitely going to be up next. My next Metroidvania to play. I love that category. But this is a really random one. It's called Record of Lotus War, and yeah, it's based off some 80s anime, which is kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons-esque anime. Anyway, really good. It
sounds amazing. I've already made a note of it, and that will be my next Steam purchase.
I liked it because it was like it was easy enough so I could play it and breeze through. There were only a handful of bosses that I had to like redo it multiple times, but it was just the right level of difficulty for this person who just needs to blast through games
Yeah,
when
it's hard to
possible.
find time.
Yeah.
I don't have any children, so that's also why I'm able to sit down and play big open world games for hours at a time.
Yeah, my thumbs are definitely starting to creak already as I get into my mid-30s, and I have a big age gap between my youngest brother, who's 13 years younger than me, and we were playing Chivalry 2 the other night, and he was just making me feel very old. Bless him. We could talk about games all day, but we've got to move on to talent topics. So I was just intrigued to know how you got into the games industry in the first place.
So I started off my career working in creative agencies, and for the first 10 years of that was predominantly at startups, startup environment, and the kind of roles that I was doing were, production, account management, but because it was a startup environment, you don't tend to have a lot of resources, so it was an opportunity to work on a lot of different things. I trained in things like a bit of product design and UX, and really we were making sort of exclusively making games for, let me restart that sentence. We were pretty much exclusively making games and interactive experiences, always for, with external partners. So we'd work with people like EA, Sony, Disney, but also broadcasters like the BBC and Channel 4, cultural organizations like the Science Museum and Tate, and brands, retail. So you were making, so many different types of content and games. That it was a really, really fun experience. And because really, although I'd always loved games and I'd always played games, from an early age, I never really saw it as a career option for me. I think, it definitely wasn't a present option, when I was going through my sort of younger school years. And also, it was a hard industry to get into. I think certainly my perception was, unless you lived in Guildford and you worked for, you were going to do QA for 5 years in a big AAA, it just didn't feel like an option. So the creative agency space was kind of like the next best thing. And I think really it was when the iPhone came out, that was the thing that really made a big difference, because it suddenly, it really lowered the barrier to entry to be able to make a game that you could actually get with like a large volume of people. A big part, I should say, is that it was although I really loved the craft of making games, I found it a little unfulfilling, because a lot of what you were making, the skill sets and the teams that I was working with at that time are the exact same teams that I'm dealing with, or working with now. In that they're brilliant craftspeople. They were making these really gorgeous experiences, and we'd spend a year making something really fantastic. But then because it was a campaign or something similar, they tend to, they don't live around for that long. So I got a little unfulfilled with making this beautiful piece of work, and then 3 months later, it didn't exist anymore. And it's really sad that, some really brilliant projects from that time are not online anymore, especially because a lot of them were in Flash, believe it or not. So, obviously now Flash is retired. So I really wanted to, pivot to doing something a bit more substantial. And then when the iPhone came out, my partner, Simon, started his own studio, and he had one of the very first kind of big indie hits with a game called Rolando on the iPhone, which at that time, it was just a very, it was before kind of the concept of, having like a big indie hit was even really a thing. We're talking about 2007, something like that. And so suddenly there was this opportunity where, somebody who was, he built his own engine, he built elements of it in Flash, and then suddenly he had the Apple marketplace where he could actually distribute. And he was approached and got a publishing deal. That just wasn't really an option. And I think with the rise of, gaming suddenly becoming into a more mainstream space as well, a lot more people obviously wanted to make games. So even in the creative agency world, it was getting a lot easier to, make more, take more risks, make more creative games. And that was really great, because it meant for creative agencies, you weren't only doing sort of marketing campaigning work. It was actually now this is something where we could really sustain ourselves and make exclusively games, and not have to, sort of do the really fun stuff that we like doing, but also, supplement that with doing like a big, huge website build or something like that. So at that point, I was approached by a studio called PRELOADED, who were at they had been around the same sort of the same time. You know, they were very much in that creative agency space, and they had an amazing reputation for making games. You know, everyone always loved the work that they did, but at this point, there was really, they'd seen that opportunity to really focus exclusively on making games, and they wanted to pivot the business away from being just a creative agency and being a game studio. So I joined them as COO in 2011. It's a really long time ago. This is making me feel very old. And, you know, within a year, we pivoted to being completely just a game studio, still working, you know, with external people, but making, you know, real proper games that were, you know, being, you know, what's hard is because they weren't necessarily commercial games. Can I just pause for a second? I just want to like collect my thoughts.
Yeah, no, good.
It was a very strange thing with Preloaded that, in fact, no, I'm not going to go into that. Let me just reset. Only because it'll take me off on too much of a tangent. Yeah, I don't want to go on too much tangent. I'll take me back. So, I was approached by Preloaded. They wanted to pivot. So yeah, within a year, we pivoted the business to being, a pure game studio, and we actually sold the company around 3 years from that point. So that was an amazing, experience, and I really enjoyed it. And I think at that point, I took a little bit of a break out after the sale went through, because I'd worked pretty much since leaving school. I'd never really sort of taken a time out or anything. And I really, when I came back, I was really struggling to find something that got me excited. I'd really loved being a COO. I think it really speaks to all the stuff that I love. You really get to work on such a big cross-section stuff. I love doing, work for hire stuff, which is a weird thing because in creative agencies, we just call them projects. There is no concept of work for hire. You're just making games. It doesn't really matter who whether you're making them for yourself or for someone else. And so when I came back, I made a really conscious decision to try consulting, and just to see how it felt. I knew that I enjoyed having a big variety of different types of projects that I'd be working on, and I absolutely loved it. I worked with a lot of different types of organizations, branding companies, technology companies, and obviously games companies, and it really reiterated to me that all creative teams are trying to solve the same problems, basically, which is balancing creative quality and being able to be financially successful. The specifics of, there are specific problems within certain industries or depending on what you're trying to do that have different solutions, but that problem is really universal to all creative teams. So it was I was really glad that I spent that time doing that. And what it did do is it really reinvigorated my love of the games industry. And I just really wanted to get back into only, making games. And around that point, the opportunity came up at Co-op, and it was, I felt that spark of passion again, and I felt ready to sort of throw myself back into something. Because being a COO is, it's a hard job and it's quite a big commitment, and you have to be really you have to have a lot of faith in the vision of what you're doing, because you're just going to be solving, every single day. So when I took that, it was another big learning curve, because it was also the first time that I'd worked with an Unreal team, and more in that kind of console world. So it was a massive learning curve. And I should also add that around this time, I also got a late stage diagnosis of ADHD. So, which explained so much of everything that's ever happened to me in my life, and anyone who knows me quite well, it wasn't a big surprise to anybody. And it also explained to me just why my career had taken the path it had, and why I'd kind of, always enjoy this like really big, broad breadth of stuff. So having that learning curve of starting at Co-op, it really, and the combination of taking the break, having a bit of a reflect on my career and the ADHD journey, it's really taught me that learning curves are absolutely fine, and if you bake them into your plan, accept the fact that there is going to be a bit of a learning curve, and lean into some of those things that you're insecure about maybe. It's a really, really, really positive thing, and actually at this point in my career, I now feel like I'm a woman. We all struggle with any sort of anything that relates to us having any kind of confidence. But, I really now feel a bit like a racehorse. I don't feel like I've never been better at my job, and I've never been able to take on, stuff that would have scared me before. And that's really exciting. So, in the games industry at the moment, we're in a really, really difficult place. The market is obviously it's so brutal out there. So the timing of those two things is not ideal. I've never been more committed and more passionate about working in the games industry. So sorry that was a little rambling, but hopefully.
No, I love that, and you put a very positive cherry on top at the end of all that. That was fantastic. Thank you. And we had Nick Walker on here, who was the COO at Space Ape recently, and we were talking about how I made the observation that it seems like COO is defined differently at every company imaginable, and the common thread is that you get to touch on so many parts of the business, which is great. But how would you define COO, or at least what's your current definition of COO at Cooperative Innovations?
But I'll answer the first question first, because I completely agree with that. I think that COO is really varies from studio to studio. I find that it tends to be at C-level. I think it's all about the skills and the talent that how's the best way to phrase it? Essentially, it depends on the rest of the team. I think that it's complementing each other's skill sets. I need to find a really better and more elegant way of saying this. But I think the reason that the role of COO is so different from one studio to the next, because it really depends on the talents of the CEO. Is it a very technical company? Is it a very creative company? If a founder and a CEO is more of a product person, then the CEO that is going to complement them best might be, have a more business development focus, for example. But if the CEO, the founder, is more of a business development, that's their natural area of excellence, then having somebody with more of a production focus can be better. So in my opinion, I think that, the partnership of a CEO and a COO, which I really, really enjoy, is, the CEO is really the person there who's, setting out the vision of, we want to be able to, get to this point, but, in 5 years from now, this is where we want to get to. And the COO is really the person who helps work out how we get there, and, the steps and, all the because really the devil in the detail is in the detail of how you get to a position like that. So, you can have a strategy, but there's 1,000 decisions that need to be made on a daily basis that are going to get you to where that vision is. And I think that's the thing that the value that a COO can add. And again, what talents that CEO needs to have will vary depending on what your personal journey is. It could be actually could be a very artistic or creative person. For my CEO, Simon Barrett, who's one of the co-founders along with our CTO, our partnership is really great. Simon's amazingly, he's a very, very hardcore engineer. He's incredibly smart, really great at business development. And he, is brilliant at being the face of the company and being out there. And, he is just, so a lot of people know Simon. He is, he's a really big talent. So I would say we almost kind of like run the company in that, like, externally, he's fantastic at going out there, securing funding, all of that, all the really tough stuff that a CEO has to do, and also, working in collaboration with our amazing CTOs. They're both engineers, and I'm more internally focused in terms of our culture, our process, our commercial agreements, all of that kind of stuff. So there's always going to be overlap because it's a similar skill set, but that's loosely how, if I was to say that we split it, it's probably something like that.
Fantastic. And leading on from that, then, you said your role is, well, taking on all of these talent topics that I guess we're here to talk about as well. So things like culture and scaling teams. So what is your take on building a company effectively? So do you have any philosophies or rules that you tend to follow when hiring, when scaling a business, when focused on the people in that company?
I think increasingly as I've gotten older and further into my career, and especially with the journey that I've been on in the last few years, is I'm so much more focused now on people's individual sort of talents and values in the broadest sense. and really seeing the value in people's transferable skills. I think especially also as somebody who's, moved through different industry sectors and, through my time consulting and stuff, seeing most people, if they're really smart and really good, and they have the right category of types of, skills that you're looking for, you can take somebody who's, perhaps never worked in a games company, but, maybe they worked in a very corporate blue crate environment. The right person with the right personality, as long as they've got, the base level skills you're looking for, can, be open to them having more potential than, you might think. Something I certainly found when I first sort of entered into the more sort of core of the games industry was I often found quite intimidated that I would go into some meetings and I felt like if I couldn't recite, 20 or 30 really obscure Criterion titles from the 80s, that I wasn't considered like a proper gamer or I wasn't experienced enough. And it was really, it was a bizarre like learning curve trying to navigate that. And for a long time, I felt a little bit insecure about it because I was a gamer, all the stuff that, gets talked about a lot about, like what defines who a player is and what type of gamers there are and the snobbery around some of those things. I think that does often translate into hiring when we're, somebody can work on an incredible title for a really long time, but it doesn't automatically equate that they're going to be fantastic at their job. So I really try to get into, why people do the job that they've chosen, their career, and what their values are. I think that, also getting the right match for the vision for the company and the vision for what they want out of their career is so important. And I think that can be overlooked sometimes. So I definitely try to spend a lot of time making sure that we really understand what their goals are. There's no wrong answer on either side of that fence. But matching it is what's important. If somebody's crazy ambitious and, wants to be running a department of 10 people within, 2 or 3 years, and you're at a studio where, you want to be quite small, you maybe don't want to go above a certain size, then there will become a point where that person's going to outgrow your studio. That also doesn't mean you shouldn't necessarily hire them. It just means that it's better to have that conversation up front and understand how you're going to navigate that, because there can be a very good reason to have somebody like that who maybe might move on in a couple of years, but you're going to get a huge benefit from that. So I guess trying to be as open-minded as possible, and not try and be so like narrow in like, just because often also a lot of the more practical skills, can be taught and can be learned. Obviously that comes with its own privilege, as you as a studio, whether you need somebody who can hit the ground running immediately. But that's something that's on my mind a lot at the moment. We're kind of looking at growth at the moment and the type of teams that we will build.
Yeah. And thanks so much for those answers. It sounds like you take into account values and culture very much from the hiring, right? If you get it correct, absolutely. People coming in, and that's how you form a culture. So is there any other actionable, purposeful things that you're doing at the moment with regards to culture, like crafting the culture that you want rather than just letting culture happen at your company or companies in the past? So
a really interesting thing in the last year and a half is that Co-op are remote, and being 100% remote is the first for me. I've worked remotely before, but not in a 100% remote. Usually, it's some people working not in the office or part-time. So I'm trying to think about like how you navigate that from a cultural point of view has been fascinating, and I've really enjoyed the challenge. It's not an easy challenge, I have to say. I think one of the biggest thing is that when you're physically in the studio, I'm a very sort of vibe based person, so I tend to really like pick up on energy and things like that, and that's obviously much easier when you're all physically sat in a room together. Who's not happy, which sort of departments we're a bit disgruntled. You can really start to sense that stuff. You kind of get the little background chatter, and you don't get the benefit of that when you're not all sat together in the same room. So for us, some of the techniques that we use, like Slack, like most people, which kind of almost acts like your virtual office. And really trying to, I like to try and set process and structure that is as kind of I like minimal amounts of structure that give people a lot of autonomy and flexibility within certain pillars. So, we have core working hours between 10 and 3, but, if you want to work, very early in the morning or late in the evening, that's completely fine as long as you can be available for any synchronous work between those core hours. Things like that, just that give people like that little bit of flexibility. Being very conscious of things like knowledge banks. That's been a big piece for us, is making sure that the sort of transference of information is quite hard when you're remote. We also, if you've got a lot of sort of legacy tech specifications, all of that kind of stuff, trying to get the balance right where you have all of that information available to anybody at any time in an asynchronous way, but isn't just a load of dusty manuals sitting, on a virtual shelf somewhere that nobody ever looks at. Is quite challenging. So also, because I'm on top of being ADHD, I'm also dyslexic. So I've always treated myself like a canary in the mine when it comes to being able to like navigate information or documentation, something like that. Making sure that it's not just attractive to look at with my creative agency background, but also that, it makes it easier to read. It makes it easier to digest. There's, being welcomed with like a big massive wall of text is quite intimidating. It can be quite hard to extract what you need from that. So really putting some effort into those kind of materials is really important.
Because culture isn't just, I think when people think about culture initially, they're like, oh, the get-togethers and some of the more fun things, like, oh, what fun things do you do at your company? It's like, no, culture is just all of the entire experience of what it's like to work at that company, and the entire experience of what it's like to work on that product and that team, and that whole experience is that positive one. And you can create a great culture by purely having really streamlined and thoughtful processes for a start, and being empathetic and making everyone's lives easier. As well as all the other stuff on top. So,
I did a talk last year that was about engineering culture into businesses. It's something I'm really passionate. I think for me, this is the core area of operations that I'm really interested in, because you're absolutely, like culture. I started out in creative agencies in the early 2000s, so there were micro scooters, there were pool tables. Porn in the toilets in some earlier companies, and that was what the culture of those businesses were. And I've had, like every branded piece of merch, like all of that stuff. And it has a place, and when done well, it can be really great, but that's not what culture is. Like, your culture is, who do you promote, to positions of, power and influence? What behavior do you tolerate? It's those little tiny details and those kind of decisions that you're making every day where you're like walking the walk, really. If you say that that you really care about diversity in your workforce, like, what are you actually doing about that? Like, what does your workforce look like? You can't just go to a conference and talk about how important it is to you. You actually need to be reflected in the team and the work that you're making and the people that you're working with. And also a really big piece on this is more, I don't know, cynically is not the right word, but creatives can sometimes feel like as soon as you talk about money, that sounds very mercenary. But I believe that like how you set up your business model is one of probably the biggest influences on culture, I think, that there is in any creative business. I think it's the single most important thing, how your business actually, how things make sense. So we can have this many people in the studio working on this type of work that we are, either if it's work for hire, whether it's you're making your own stuff, but like being really, really robust about how all those, like how that business model, what your P&L looks like. That's the thing that decides whether you can actually, nurture this type of culture that you're saying that you want. So, if you have something, a really big creative ambition, we want to make really high risk art, like complete games that are just art for our own enjoyment. And we want to make something that's really beautiful and it's just a complete expression of what all of our beliefs are. That's amazing. But you can't also have that ambition and be like, and we also want to be the next AAA unicorn. The ambition needs to make sense. The business model needs to make sense. The business plan needs to make sense. So that's something that I always, especially when I was consulting, that's probably what I spent the majority of my time on is, do the numbers add up? Does your intention of what you want to do actually, like, does that add up with the pragmatism and the realities of what you're going to be doing every day?
That's a really interesting take that you really don't hear very often, like the business model shaping the culture. But yeah, you're so right. Like, it's also like, is there, we talk about crunch culture a lot, don't we, in the games industry? It's like, where does that pressure come from? Whatever's measured is what will get delivered as well. And so it's like, that business model
100%.
alone is like, that how the company makes money will ultimately dictate so many of the behaviors of the leadership team, and therefore so many behaviors of the company. It's a really obvious point now you've pointed out, but I don't think I've ever heard anyone say the business model shapes the culture before. So
100%. And I think, going back to that point of, your hiring policy of getting that right match of being, I think that sometimes creative teams shy away from the financial realities or the financial side of things. And, there's a stereotype of anything to do with funding, money or corporate or anything like that is negative. And, really to be the best creative work comes out of when you put all of that, the goal is to get all of that out of the way and to put all that stuff to one side. But the reality of how that actually happens in practice is through honesty and pragmatism. It's not through going, well, if we just get enough money, we won't have to worry about the money, which is often the strategy that, I do see quite a lot. Or there's, an investor coming in with a load, giving a team a load of money. One thing I was always very, the closer I got to these kinds of deals and things is there's quite often not a huge amount of due diligence on the investors' side and also like on the publishing side of things into how are these teams going to deliver what they're saying. So when you see this amazing pitch of this great game, from their perspective, there's this dynamic that is awesome. That looks great. You say you can do it for that much money. Brilliant. Cool. Let us know when you're done. Kind of. I'm oversimplifying. But that's obviously, quite... It puts a lot of onus on the developer to, really, have done their homework and their own due diligence before, they've gotten to that point. And I think that's definitely, has changed a little bit in the last 5 years, I'd say. And I think there is a bit more due diligence. But, with the state of the market the way it is, and, with the sustainability being such an important aspect of the industry, and it's probably one of the biggest topics at the moment that people are talking about. And it's certainly something I feel really passionate about. I just don't think that, if we want this industry to be sustainable, I think that smaller studios and creative teams need to be supported more in how all of that stuff works. And, I think there's a lot of responsibility on people who are giving people money that we're not, we don't want to have the same sort of, arguably we might be in the middle of it. We don't want to have the same sort of bubble as like the housing market. There has been a fashion in recent years of like investment being like a way to, make fast profit essentially, because you get all these great games hits that make all of this money. And I think because my background was work for hire, I knew that all of the clients we were working with, like, they don't, it's not that they don't care, but it's not their priority of whether we're going to lose money on a project or not. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we can do what we're saying we can do really comfortably to the creative quality that we want to be able to do it with. And if there needs to be a negotiation and things like that, like I'm a big believer in doing a lot of very upfront sort of strategic conversations to make sure that you're aligned and set up on the right foot before you actually start, because it makes everything so much easier later on. And those conversations up front that's when it's like cheap and easy and quick to change stuff and to, make those kind of tweaks and stuff.
Yeah. And I think it's incredibly refreshing when you meet someone who's, let's say, on the creative side. To be honest, that really means anyone who's making stuff, as let's say product people. It's like, you meet a game designer who actually understands at least the commercial aspects of like, yes, the company needs to make money, the game needs to succeed, so we can make another one and keep going and keep progressing. It's like that. It reminds me of that life purpose Venn diagram, that Ikigai concept from Japan. So it's like that 4 circles interacting, like what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, what you're good at. Just that sweet spot right in the middle of all 4 of those. It's like, yeah, we can you can still work on stuff that you love, but you love a lot of things about games, and you love a lot of different products. You know, try and find the one that is going to do commercially well, as well as like fulfilling and really key to your skill set. So yeah, I don't know if that was a bit too much of a tangent away from what you were talking about.
No, not at all. I totally agree with that. I think that that's what pragmatism looks like in real life. And I think, pragmatism gets a bad rap because it's often seen as like a compromise. But some of the most heartbreaking things I've seen in my career were creative projects that never really fulfilled their potential because there wasn't enough resources. The ambition was too, but there was basically a mismatch between what we were trying to achieve with the resources we had available for one reason or another. And I think that there's nothing more heartbroken than seeing something that's beautiful, but could have been really, for whatever reason, it wasn't quite as successful as it could have been. And I think that a lot of those situations, my perspective comes from really prioritizing, like, I want to create having the best creative product at the end is my number one goal. Being able to make another one of those is definitely probably jointly the next goal. Huge financial success is the third goal. But I think that if you want to make something that is the best it can possibly be, just be really pragmatic and really think about how long have you got to do this? Like, how much runway have you got realistically, really think ahead, play out, and that's one of the brilliant things. I'm a big fan of spreadsheets. I love modeling stuff because you can literally go, okay, well, if we were to spend this long, especially for small indie teams who are making their own game, getting really robust on putting together, your own, stop seeing like cost, I think some indie teams tend to see putting a budget together as something that is almost, it's a box you're ticking for a publisher or for the person who you might be going to money for. And actually, like, this is your opportunity to really go, like, let's paint out what this looks like in reality. If the 10 of us, 5 of us are all sat here for, a year, how many hours of work is that? You don't necessarily, I know it's project management, so it doesn't sound like, it's not the sexiest part of game making, but it's the thing that will allow you to just be on rails once you're in the creative process and not have to keep worrying about, like, are we going to run out of runway? Or, the more you plan ahead, the more headspace you've then got to just make something brilliant. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of that way of working.
Oh yeah, perfect. I think there should be a massive appreciation for anyone that can keep these studios on track whilst retaining their creative core. Incredibly difficult balance to do. But before we hit record, I'd made the point to you, like, some of the games that I loved the most this year so far have been indie developed games or made by small studios. Off the top of my head, like Balatro, Pal World. We were just talking about Animal Well.
Dave the Diver, love that. I know it's not technically in indie. They've got a huge amount of funding, but there's a whole Black Myth Wukong as well as another came out from a small team. But I think it's the realization that games are meant to be there for fun and enjoyment, and there was kind of, it's felt like this building up of, like, what is fun in the games industry. It means big open world, live service, all these other things, and it's like no, we can definitely reduce the this back whilst keeping the quality. I would say, like, on the flip side of that, because I also love massive, big, high budget, open world games. They're amazing. And I do think that the games industry is at its best when it is a real ecosystem of, lots of different types of games, lots of different types of budgets. And I think when, it comes to the business model side, on like the AAA side, on the big budget stuff, again, it comes back to the matching what the reality is with what you're asking people. If you hire a bunch of people who are very, autistic in temperament, and I don't mean that in the negative sense, but in the true sense, on the one hand, you want to recruit these incredibly autistic people who really are just trying to make something that, is an expression of their own art. But then you also kind of, like, lock them in a cubicle, and, the environment is more of a kind of, can feel, a little bit like a factory. Or I'm not casting aspersions across all AAAs. I think it's gotten a lot better in the last 10 years. But it works both ways is ultimately my point. I think you have to, know what you are, know what you're trying to make, and communicate that to everybody. Money, definitely, it should never be a dirty word. And I think the more you try and avoid talking about it and get it out of the way, that it just doesn't have anything positive for anything. And then you end up with, a lot of creatives who are just like, they hate the corporate side of games. They think it's something to, be navigated and avoided rather than embraced. And I think that the business side of games needs to, could do a lot better in terms of not just its own PR, but just on being, a bit more kind of open with what the realities of, running a business are. It's really hard. I feel I really feel for anyone who's in any kind of management and C-level position at the moment. The decisions they're having to make in their studios are really, really difficult. But the one thing I've really found from an operational point is that often those issues, the further you swim upstream, those are where those decisions, not just, did you pick the wrong publisher, or did you, the stuff that, commonly will be complained about, but it's actually more, was there an unrealistic objective at the beginning? It's such a big topic. It's very, very broad, because it's not just, this is just one aspect of some of these issues, but I do think
and we're coming right to the end now, and unfortunately, and I definitely talk about this a lot. And I guess that point of if you are very transparent about business goals, finances, all these metrics, like, this is actually really fascinating work, and like how the business runs. And don't create like an us and them. If you have a culture of being like, no, we are all one team, or every single person in this company is adding value with their own skill set, it's not a product and everyone else.
100%. And
storytelling as well, just to get them excited about finances.
100%. Sorry to interrupt you. That's exactly what I was just going to say. That the more you can kind of communicate the connection between the business side of things with actually like the quality of life stuff that creators are having and the types of games that you're making, I think that's a really, really, really positive thing. Transparent. I was surprised that when I sort of, really got into the deep bit of the games industry, like, we're not very transparent, I don't think, as an industry. I think we're very cooperative and, kind and friendly, and, there's a really good community spirit across the games industry. But I think also whether it's because, the funding is competitive and hard, it's a very competitive industry. And I think the fact that it's so hard to, get data points and benchmarks for things, it doesn't help us as an industry. And I think that's something I would love to see change in the coming years. Whether it's sales figures are always going to be a difficult thing to get transparency on, but it's unique to the games in my experience, the kind of the number of conversations I have of things that need to be obfuscated, which sometimes, do they really, it's not, something that necessarily is going to affect a share price, but I think we're quite secretive as a industry, and that might be a bit of a controversial thing to say, but I think that sometimes can hurt us, because the more we learn and the more we share, the better we can get as an industry.
I agree. This phrase "walled gardens" gets brought up a lot in games, because with IP development and creative processes, the secret sauce that studios have, there's a real just innate reluctance to open up and share. Which is a contradiction, because like I said, the community spirit, the friendliness of the industry would make you think otherwise. Yeah,
it makes me curious of whether that contributes to the kind of them and us type, because you've basically got something where on the creative shop floor, for want of a better way of describing it, the people who are making stuff are all, everyone's really open and sharing information together. But then as soon as you hit that kind of corporate level, when it's something to do with business, for, reasonable commercial reasons, it becomes that more walled garden. But I think that probably does contribute to that feeling of them and us.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Hey, my final question for you today. Sorry to rush you right to the end, but feel free to take your time on this question, by the way. But what is your favorite interview question? We talked quite a bit about culture and building of companies. Therefore, you must have done a fair few interviews in your time. What is your favorite interview question?
I fear I hopefully won't repeat myself too much. But I really like asking about where someone wants to be, sort of whether it's 1 to 5 years, depending on, how senior the role is, how long, there's an expectation of how long they'd be around for. Because I think that when you ask about those questions, it sounds like a very cheesy interview question, of where you want to be in 3 years. But I think you really get an insight into, do they really think about that type of stuff? Are they, where are they in their career? Are they thinking about, what sort of projects they want to work on? It gives you a little insight into, like how strategically they think about that stuff. And it also gives you a bit of an insight into their approach to sort of dreaming, how pragmatic are they? How blue sky are they? You actually get a bit of an insight into like just creatively how they think. And it also really helps get to that point about like how aligned the business is for what they're looking for. Because ultimately hiring anyone, it's a value exchange. People aren't just working with you for, the joy of, because they think you're awesome. Everyone is entitled to have an amazing career and to be nurtured. So to make sure you're the right fit, I think that is a really important thing to talk about at an interview point.
Yeah, because as well, it gets into like, are they thinking strategically about their career? Are they thinking about what they want to learn? And most importantly, what actions are they going to be taking to achieve those goals? I think it's totally viable to take a job at a company because you're like, oh, I really want this job at your company because I think I'm going to learn all of this stuff and be able to achieve all these things. And as an employee, you're like, awesome, yeah, but I want you to achieve all those things. That's going to be good for the company. It's going to be good for you.
Completely. As an employer, you want everyone to be their absolute best self. Like the better somebody gets, the better that is for you as a business. And hopefully, if you are helping them do that, then the more loyal, or the more they're going to get out of being with you as a team as well. So, I'm really sorry.
That's all right.
I did turn my phone off.
No, it's all good. And worst case scenario, something you mentioned before is that, worst case scenario, they in terms of like worst case, they've achieved their absolute optimal amount. Is like they perhaps grown too big for the company and they move on. And again, that's not a bad scenario. You're going to have someone leave who came out so much better than when they came in, and they're going to leave an advocate of the company.
I always feel that that's really short-sighted. I worked at a studio once that, the boss used to get really upset when people would leave, and the whole, and again, go back to the creative agency world, like the whole idea of like, we're a family, and that to me at this point is a complete red flag if any company has that type of culture, because what that means, is that we can really exploit you a little bit and take advantage of your loyalty. And we're all professional, we're working in a professional company. That doesn't mean you can't be creative, it doesn't mean you can't be artistic, but it does mean that you deserve a good work-life balance. I think the world is getting a little bit better at that now, hopefully. So yeah, I don't think that it's fine. People are going to move on. It happens, and if it does happen, you want it to be in the best possible way. You want to know it's coming as well. So it's, I try not to shy away from that stuff.
Yeah, with the whole, we're a family. I'm like, oh my goodness, if you're anything like my family, then
Same.
then maybe not.
I really like, I heard a much better analogy is like being a sports team. When you're a sports team, there's space for everybody. You can still have a man on the match, which is brilliant. You get to celebrate somebody's successes without anybody, that becoming at the cost of somebody else. I really do like that analogy. And I think definitely the business is like the coach that should be, you want to get out of everybody's way, give them the information and the resources that they need to be brilliant. And then, if you're lucky, you get to watch from the sidelines. And I love working with people way smarter, way more creative than me, and just if I can help get some of that stuff out of the way for them, then like that, I've done my job.
Yeah, totally agree. And thank you so much, Kate, for coming on. I don't think I've laughed so much during a podcast recording, so that has been lovely. So thank you for that. Really, really enjoyed all your takes. And hopefully we actually get to meet in person one day. That'd also be really nice. So yeah, thanks again, Kate.
Thanks so much, Joe. I really enjoyed it. Love to chat to you.